Hello everyone, welcome to another Shadowlands video. My name is Barokoshama, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the recent Mythic Plus changes that's happening in patch 9.1. A lot of balancing, tuning, and just awesome stuff that's happening for 9.1 for the Mythic Plus scene. I'm here in Oribos on retail, but we're going to be talking about all the stuff that's happening on the PTR. Not the PTR, the patch notes. Jeez. Let's get to it. So, first things first, I will be leaving the link to the Wowhead article covering these changes in the description down below. If you guys like this kind of content and you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. Like the video if you like it, and comment down below what's your most favorite change that's happening for 9.1 and the Mythic Plus changes. First things first, they're reducing all Mythic Plus enemy auto attack damage by 10%. Now there's a lot of mob changes coming in 9.1 strictly because player characters are getting more powerful, so they have to do balancing in order to adjust these things. The main things is that the auto attacks are getting reduced by 10%. Mythic level dungeons, their health and the damage that the mobs do has been increased by 26%, and Mythic Plus enemies are being increased by 35% for health and for damage, excuse me, and for health it's 39%. Of course, they're doing this, like I said, because we are scaling up, so they have to make these changes in order to accommodate that. There's a whole bunch of new reward changes that's coming as well with the Great Vault. Rewards have been increased by 26 item levels. Of course, all of the normal, heroic, and mythic dungeon difficulties, those have all been baseline item level changes scaled up, and then the Mythic Plus damage or Mythic Plus dungeon rewards are being scaled up as well. The new teleport system. This is something that we had back in Mists of Pandaria. When you completed challenge modes, you were able to get portals to all of the challenge mode dungeons. They're doing something very similar to the dungeons in Shadowlands, but this time it's better because even though the portals have a 8-hour cooldown, if you time a Mythic Plus or you complete a Mythic Plus, the cooldown gets reset. Pretty good. Of course, you get these portals when you complete each Mythic Plus dungeon at a level 20 on time. You get the achievement and you can teleport to the dungeon's entrance. That's good. So Tahasup in the Hall of Holdings, which this guy right here, you're going to be able to talk to him to get a Keystone instead of completing a Mythic dungeon if you didn't get a Keystone from your vault. So you can talk to him. That's cool. He spawns at the end of the dungeon as well. If you completed before the time limit is reached, and he's going to offer you a Keystone exchange, a one-time Keystone exchange. If the Keystone that you have in your bags is either lower or the same level as the key that you completed, you can then swap it out for another key if you do not like the Keystone that you have. But he'll only appear if you completed the Keystone on time. Now comes the juicy stuff, the really good tuning stuff. A lot of this deals with tanks because these affixes affect tanks the most. And this is a good thing because the tanking scene for Mythic Plus has been a nightmare. It's been absolutely chaos. And tanks have had to work really hard in Shadowlands to actually keep things together. And these changes, super good. Let's talk about them. So for one, new weekly affix rotation has been updated, so they have new combinations and all that stuff. Bolstering now increases maximum health by 15 per stack, was 20, and damage done by 20 per stack. So the damage stays the same, but the health increases a lot less. This is good. Necrotic. Level 61 enemies now apply necrotic wounds on every other auto attack instead of every auto attack. This is going to be really good for how often tanks will have to just deliberately get away from mobs to drop necrotic stacks. They can stay in combat with those mobs and face tank them a lot better. or a lot longer. So this is a really good change. Raging, this is a big one. This is a really big change. Enraged mobs now increase damage done by 75% instead of 100%. Absolutely massive change. Tanks are going to be taking a lot less damage. Things are going to be a lot less scary. You'll probably still have to kite certain mobs, but this is a really good change. Now, Storming. Storming has been such a pain in the ass for melee. And it's about time that it got a really good change. So Storming Whirlwinds now always move in the same direction, instead of some of them spawning and then moving in opposite directions of each other. They will always move in the same direction, and its movement speed has been reduced by 30%. It'll be a lot easier to dodge them now. Storming Whirlwinds now dissipate once a target is hit. So if you get knocked up by one, you can actually just soak a Storming Tornado and it'll disappear. So tanks can actually clear up melees to make things a lot easier for them, as long as they're doing it at appropriate timings, obviously. This is really, really good for clearing the path, making things a lot easier for the melee, making things a lot easier for your Holy Paladin that's in melee, or your Mistweaver Monk, right? Good Storming change. This affix was super annoying to deal with, and people just didn't play. Melee people just hated Storming me, so this is a really good change. Now let's talk about the boss tuning. Hakar the Soul Flayer has been a problem for pushing keys, whether it's on Tyrannical or Fortified, for a very long time. It's a very finicky boss. You have to use Bloodlust at very specific parts of the fight, otherwise it could be just a huge mess. So let's talk about what's happening with Hakar. Hakar's cooldown and energy regeneration is now paused when Blood Barrier is applied, and will resume once Blood Barrier is removed. This is really good because you could just fall behind on the boss, and he could just cast Blood Barriers back to back, which was a huge problem, and was the cause of a lot of wipes for group content, especially Pug content. So this change alone is going to significantly slow down the fight. It's going to allow healers to catch up if need be. It's going to allow DPS to kind of just, you know what, not panic, do the actual mechanics of the fight. It's good. Blood Barrier no longer grants Hakar immunity to interrupts, which is good because Blood Barrage is no longer interruptible and no longer has a duration. Actually, that's a counterintuitive statement. Hakar did nothing wrong. No, he did a lot wrong. So the way that this fight is likely going to play out is just use the Blood Barriers at effective push points in the fight, because I believe it's every he pushes Blood Barrier at, or no, it's around the spawns, the ad spawns, and he'll spawn a ad at certain points in his health pool. You're probably still going to be approaching Hakar at the with the same strategy of, if you're not lusting at the start of the fight, you do not push Hakar past the first threshold where he spawns the ad. Instead, you allow the first Blood Barrier to go through when he gets full energy, and then you spawn the ad, and you do that throughout the entirety of the fight, unless you are lusting on pull, and then you just burn the boss. Okay, these changes are going to make Hakar a lot less hectic. It's going to be really, really good for Pug groups. It's going to be good for even groups that are progressing through higher keys. Good Hakar changes. I like this. Dealer Zayaxa. She's a scary boss. Like, if you did not have Bloodlust or the Prideful buff going into this boss, you were in trouble. It required a lot of communication between Arcane Lightning and using the Arcane Vulnerability, swapping them between melee, the tank, the healer, a range. It required a lot of communication. And Blizzard has significantly reduced the amount of damage that the group is going to be taking from this fight. So this is good. So Arcane Lightning periodic damage reduced by 15%. Awesome. And jump damage reduced by 20%. A lot of shit can happen on this fight. If a jump happens right before a bomb is going to go off, or a jump happens mid-air when bombs are going off, and then the person just dies from fall damage. It happened a lot. It happened quite a lot. So reducing that Arcane Lightning jump damage is quite significant. And Arcane Vulnerability now only increases damage taken from Arcane Lightning. It used to increase all of your Arcane damage that you took. So if you accidentally took one of those beams, right, and you had the debuff, you took an extreme amount of damage. So this is good. This is a good change. Halls of Atonement now. Loyal Stoneborn melee and Stone Breath damage reduced by 10%. This was definitely something that I saw coming because Loyal Stoneborns were used for 1 on scary packs and for 2 on pridefuls. And they significantly reduced the threat of prideful mobs unless you were skipping them, of course. So this Loyal Stoneborns getting a tune here is definitely something that I expected. Shard of Halkias. Thrash damage reduced by 20% and ranged increased to 60 yards. It was 40 yards. You can no longer outrange Thrash. That's the main thing here, but its damage is reduced. Double-edged sword, obviously. You're going to need to communicate either defensives or, in my case as an Elemental Shaman, using Ancestral Guidance, using Fey Transfusion on these shards during the Thrashes is going to come in handy. But your group's obviously going to be taking a lot less damage from Thrash, specifically by 20%. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to affect really, really high keys. I don't think 20% damage reduction is enough. If your entire team is taking Thrash damage, but it's only reduced by 20%, that's still a lot of healing. So I don't think the Thrash damage reduction is enough, especially on the higher keys. There's going to be, you're going to have to put in or dedicate a lot of cooldowns to Shards of Halkias now in order to deal with this change. So moving on, Depraved Obliterator's Wicked Bolt damage increased by 27%. This is nuts. Like, this is nuts. It's a good thing that I have a 12-second kick as an Elemental Shaman, but like, these Wicked Bolts already kind of hurt, and I don't agree with this change. Especially because Obliterators, there's multiple Obliterators in Shards of Halkias pulls. You can have up to 3 Obliterators on one of the shards, 2 Obliterators on the other 2. It's like, that's a lot of Wicked Bolts. So this could change what the best ways to approach this dungeon is going to be. Obviously, mass silences are going to be useful. You're not going to be able to outrange Thrash anymore, so as an Elemental Shaman, I'm going to be in range to kick them, which is good. But these pulls, the Shard of Halkias pulls, have become a lot more scarier because of these changes. And it's going to be interesting to see how groups are going to cope with this. Obviously, I think that Vengeance Demon Hunters are still going to be exceptionally strong in Halls of Atonement. Even stronger now with how much magic damage the tanks are going to be taking. And especially because they have AoE Grip, they have AoE Silence, they have they can use their Imprison to interrupt, they can use their own kicks to interrupt. Like, I don't think the tank game is going to change much here, especially in Halls. I think Vengeance Demon Hunters are just going to become stronger in that key. But yeah, it's a little bit of a scary change. Hopefully it's not too impactful. Hopefully it's not reducing how high you can push this dungeon by too much. But these are going to be quite significant. Mists of Tirna Scithe. Let's move on to that. Ingra Malash. Ingra's health reduced by 10%. And Droman's health reduced by 5%. This is going to change your push timings a little bit. So you need to keep that in mind. As an Elemental Shaman, I would use Stormkeeper. I would use Stormkeeper when Droman pushed, and I would use it on Ingra only. And I would use Storm Elemental when we Bloodlusted. I may have to use Storm Elemental a little bit earlier now to start gaining those stacks faster because Droman's going to push a little bit faster. But this also means that more groups are going to be able to one-phase the boss. What does one-phase the boss mean? Well, that means that you Bloodlust, you have Prideful buff, and you push Droman within a certain amount of time, and you save all your cooldowns for the Ingra burn phase. When you push Droman, he puts a debuff on Ingra, he stuns him, and starts to put a damage increase debuff on him. And a lot of groups were just saving cooldowns like Convoke the Spirits, Combustion in my case, Stormkeeper, and Storm Elemental fast lightning bolts, and whatever other DPS cooldowns other classes brought. But it's going to be a lot easier for groups to actually one phase, or in some cases on Tyrannical Wakes, 2 phase. And I think this change itself is directly targeting the Tyrannical Weeks for Mists of Tirna Scithe. Tyrannical Weeks in that dungeon were extremely hard because of how much boss health the boss actually had. So it's good. It's targeting Tyrannical. It's going to make Fortified even easier. That's great. Let's move on. Drust Bow Breakers. So let's quickly move on to MDT to show you guys which mobs these actually are. Oh geez, that's such a bad example. Are these ones? Yes. Okay, so the Thrash mobs. Health reduced by 15%, or health increased by 15%. So this is interesting because the way that groups would actually, a lot of groups would actually deal with these mobs, they would only pull these two. You would avoid this group right here. You would avoid this group right here. You would only pull these 2 Drust Bow Breakers in the entire dungeon. Now the way that groups actually did this is because they would spawn a Prideful off of these 2 Drust Bow Breakers, but they would also either use the mushrooms to heal the group, because when you use a mushroom, if you're a Night Fae, you can actually go into the Mushroom Cove and use the healing mushroom or the mushrooms themselves to fully top your health pool. So during the Thrash effect, groups would either have them pre-positioned in this area and use the mushrooms to stay fully health and have uptime on these guys, or they would push both of them to 50%, which is when they do the Thrash, and then your range would actually outrange the Thrash to prevent the healer from having to use a lot of cooldowns, and they would save those cooldowns for the Prideful mob that would actually come up right after these 2 died. So increasing the health of these 2 mobs by 15%, it directly slows down the pull, obviously, which means things that are going to be impacted by this are obviously going to be your cooldown timings, okay, and how you're actually going to be able to how quickly you're going to push the Bow Breakers in order for you to either do which strat, use the mushrooms, use the outranging strat. I think this change is going to make the mushroom grabbing strat a lot more beneficial because of how much uptime you're going to have on the Drust Bow Breakers. Obviously, because the health increase, you're going to want to keep attacking them for as often as possible. So I think more groups are going to go for the mushroom grabbing strat instead of completely outranging the mobs during that. So Mistveil Guardian's Bucking Rampage now triggers its cooldown on spell start. Bucking Rampage was an ability that if you're hit by it, it's an AoE circle around the Guardian. It's a Guardian, right? Yeah. That if you're hit by a tick, you just get knocked aside. It was really annoying for tanks. It was really annoying for melee. As soon as the Mistveil's Guardians started their cast, you had to either stop it with a stun or an incapacitate, and it would stop it. But Mistveil Guardian's Bucking Rampage now triggers its cooldown on spell start. This is good because if you miss-stunned, right, you had to stun after the channel or after the startup of the cast. Instead now you can actually stun the Mistveil Guardian's Bucking Rampage when he starts to cast the spell, instead of when he does the ramp up and then it's a channel effect. You had to stun him during the channel effect. This is much better. I like this change because it makes dealing with these guys so much easier. Spine Maw Staghorn health increased by 30%. This is insane. These guys right here, the ones that cause the shield effect or the mass heal, these guys are super annoying because you can't pull too many of them. Some groups will do this triple pull here, and then you'll have to use interrupts or assign interrupts on specific things. And they're not stunnable. These guys are not stunnable. They have to be interrupted. So increasing their health by 30% is only making priority target damaging effects or damage breakdowns more beneficial in these pulls. So, for instance, as an elemental shaman, what do I have an answer for this? Obviously, in Mythic Plus, you're either using one of two legendaries, the Skybreaker's Fiery Demise or the Echoes of the Great Sundering Legendary. The Echoes of the Great Sundering Legendary makes it so that your Earthshock empowers your next Earthquake. What is Earthshock? It's a single target ability. You're implementing Earthshock into your AoE rotation. You're now going to always want to put your Earthshocks into the Staghorns to do priority target damage because they have way more health than before. 30% more health. They're probably going to be one of the last mobs to die. That's going to be really annoying because they were always one of the first that you focus down. And so they have even more health now. That's annoying. So it's going to make timings of this, and with the new affix, I'm sure the affix revolves around percentage-based mobs in the dungeon, just like Prideful was. So I could be wrong on that. I haven't tested it out much, but that's going to significantly prolong the timings of this pull, and it's going to make certain classes and their damage profiles a lot better in these pulls than others. Moving on to Necrotic Wake. Amarth, health reduced by 15%. This is really good. And Tortured Echoes damage reduced by 15% per stack. You actually dedicated a lot of cooldowns to Amarth. And the reason for this was because of how scary this boss is. Both, you had to have, hopefully, Bloodlust and hopefully a Prideful buff from one of these pulls, and then you invis-potted into here. Hopefully you had also procced the RP so you could go directly into the boss. But a lot of groups were using Bloodlust, Prideful buff, spears, right? The heavenly spears that you picked up. And in some cases, the anima orbs, the anima discharge orbs, in order to attack this boss or to just totally annihilate this boss, because it had pretty much a harden rage effect on it based off of how many adds or add waves you went on it. And part of the reason was because of how much damage the boss was able to do with Champion's Boon. Tortured Echoes. Tortured Echoes being whenever he uses his... Here we go. Final Harvest. Whenever he explodes the adds, right, you'll see big green swirlies around the mobs that he summons bodies. Whether they're alive or they're dead, he's still going to be casting Final Harvest. Based off of how many of the adds were out or how many of the adds were consumed by Final Harvest, in some cases you can use abilities like Cyclone for Druids, Repentance, Blind, right? And the boss will not gain a stack of Tortured Echoes, but Tortured Echoes was doing a lot of damage further in the fight because of how many adds he was able to get out. Significantly reducing the amount of damage that Tortured Echoes does per stack is also a very big change. So not only are you reducing the amount of health that the boss has, but you're also reducing the amount of damage that the boss is doing. The main source of damage that the boss does to the entire group was this effect. So it's a lot easier on the healers, it's a lot easier on the group. Maybe you don't have to dedicate so much CDs to Amarth anymore because of these changes. Time will tell. We'll see how groups interact with these changes and use that effect. Or better use spears, anima orbs, bloodlust. Maybe there's better timings that we haven't found out yet because of these changes. So this is going to be good. Nalthor the Rhyme Bender. Nalthor's siphoned health reduced by 15%. Siphoner. Nalthor's Siphoner. So what is that? That's the add in the gauntlet. So when you get sent down from Dark Exile you have to attack the Siphoner so that you can use the Gilded Champion to get back up on the platform. A lot of classes were actually having issues with this part of the fight, because if they got sent down but they had already used all their cooldowns, obviously they don't want to use their cooldowns on an ad that has nothing to do with boss damage. So some classes were actually struggling to get back up to the platform because they just couldn't kill this guy in time. And if they did kill it, they were down there for so long that they just got so many stacks of the frigid cold that it was causing problems up on the platform. You would drop Razor Shard Ice once your frigid cold debuff expired, and based off how many stacks you had, it would make the pool super big. Some people just couldn't even make it out of the pool. They would just die from the debuff, or because they were in Razor Shard Ice for too long, they didn't have enough mobility, right? They had too many stacks, the pool was too big. This was causing a lot of issues in some cases for some classes. So reducing the amount of health that the Siphoner has affects all of these things. It can affect how long you stay down, which in turn increases the amount of stacks that you have, or decreases that because you're not down there for so long. But not only that, they increase the duration of the champion's boon to 40 seconds instead of 30 seconds. So it's a lot more worth to actually go down there and get the champion's boon from saving the Gilded Champion from the Siphoner. Coming back up, you get this massive crit buff for a very long time. So it's good. These are good changes. I really like this. Now Thor the Rhyme Mender was kind of a tough fight. It was a long fight. And these changes are actually significantly going to reduce the amount of time that you spend on this fight. It's going to make the timer a lot easier. Necrotic Wake's going to be a lot less challenging of a dungeon, especially on tyrannical weeks. You guys are going to see a pattern that a lot of these changes are targeted directly to make tyrannical weeks a lot easier because of the Mythic Plus changes that are coming for Season 2. You're going to have to be doing tyrannical week keys in order to get the achievements for Keystone Master. So, a lot of these changes are dealing with that. It's good. These are good changes. Plaguefall. Plaguefall's a really silly key. You used rigged plague borers a lot in the key, and Blizzard significantly reducing the effectiveness of these strategies. So the first boss, Globgrog, his health has been reduced by 10%. Mainly, obviously, tyrannical weeks on this boss were very scary, but also players were bringing rigged plague borers into the boss to help deal with how massive of a health pool that this boss had. So reducing the health of the boss and also changing what kind of plague borers are out is going to impact how you deal with the boss. Let's first talk about plague borers that are located outside of the gauntlet event. They've been replaced with wretched plague borers. Now, I don't even know if wretched plague borers are on the map or if they are a completely new mob. Let's just quickly check that. So you have these plague borers over here. These are rigged plague borers. So these guys have bombs on their back, right? And you would use these to bring into the boss. There's regular plague borers over here. So obviously these guys are not wretched plague borers. And I think wretched plague borers are actually a completely new mob type, because I don't see them anywhere else on here. And the gauntlet event, which is Viralaxis, Lightweaver, he is the gauntlet event, so he sends out rigged plague borers. Wretched plague borers, I think, are a completely new mob type that we have not seen before, and I mean, if they're not rigged, they probably don't have bombs on their back, which means that I don't have any footage for you. I have no idea how these wretched plague borers are going to affect the way that you deal with the dungeon. Obviously, because we don't have rigged plague borers in this area anymore, you're not going to be able to use them to clear out this area, which is probably going to significantly impact how much time you save in this part of the dungeon. And you know, it could change the route a bit. You could start to pull stuff over here instead of completely skipping it, right? you could be pulling more of the stuff over here because this area could be far less useful as far as the rigged plague wars go. This could drastically change how you do your routes in the dungeon. So that's going to be interesting to see how players change that up. And the rigged plague wars that spawn during the gauntlet event now have limited spawns. So if you start the event, you only have a limited amount of plague boars that are going to spawn in the gauntlet event. Before, it would spawn infinite amount of plague boars until you killed this boss, this mini boss. Now, who knows how many we have? Maybe 8? Maybe 8 spawns? So you're gonna, once you start this event, it's a rush against time. This is going to be very stressful. For tanks, for DPS that are pulling things together, right? Good luck. Alright, what's next? Sanguine Depths. Crixus the Varish, the first boss. I'm not even. Juggernaut Rush, damage reduced by 15%. This is going to reduce the amount of raid or party damage, unless you obviously have immunity. Ice Block, Paladin Bubble, even rogues could use evasion to 100% dodge this effect. All that kind of stuff. Reducing the damage, and Essence Absorption, damage reduced by 15%. This is directly, again, targeting Tyrannical. Good. Reducing the amount of damage that the boss is going to do on Tyrannical weeks. Let's make this simpler. Executor. This is the second boss of the dungeon. You had to use Bloodlust. You had to use, you had to have Prideful in some cases going into this boss, because this boss was a race against time too. You only had so many cooldowns, and the Fleeting Manifestation was the biggest upset of this boss, because you had to dedicate cooldowns. This thing need to die quickly. Fleeting Manifestation obviously is the ad that gets spawned and does a pulsing AoE, and when it dies, based off of how long that the ad survived for, there would be a pool that got put under the underneath where it died. So what Blizzard is doing is growing pride damage reduced by 20%. While alive, each fleeting manifestation inflicts 1400 shadow damage to all players every 1 second. Reducing this by 20%, that's a huge change. This is good. This was even a problem on Fortified Weeks. This boss could wipe you on Fortified Weeks because of how much damage these guys did. The boss itself wasn't a problem unless you didn't have a defensive cooldown or healing for the Castigate cast. That's where some problems could arise, but the main issue was not having enough damage for the Fleeting Manifestation. Those guys hurt. Okay, now is the mob surrounding the inner ring. These are really good changes. Chamber Sentinels Severing Slice now only strikes the primary target, instead of it being a cone in front of the Chamber Sentinel, which was very devastating for poorly positioned melee. These guys are now way easier to tank. Problem is, because it's not a cone in front of the boss anymore, it's now a targeted ability. So some tanks now may not be able to just completely outrange the Severing Slice, which means they're probably going to be just taking it. You may not be able to outrange this anymore as a tank. That could be a problem. Remnant of Fury's Explosive Anger, damage reduced by 25%. This is good. Just reducing the amount of damage that... Where is it? I think it's this one? Yeah, Remnant of Fury. Fury's Explosive Anger, damage reduced by 25%. You could dispel this anyway. It was just a curse that they put on a target, or you could even interrupt it. But they're just reducing the damage, which is fine. Visage of Doubt no longer casts Growing Mistrust. This is such a big change. Growing Mistrust was a environmental effect that they put on the ground. It caused groups to get into choke points, to move big distances, right? Accidentally pulling mobs by butt pulling them because you had to move your shit around. You had to move the entire pack because of pats that were coming in the group, and it was a mess in some cases. I digress. Visage of Doubt, no longer casting Growing Mistrust. These pools on the ground, first of all, they were massive. And if you didn't drop the Growing Mistrust up against the wall, it would completely overtake the entire hallway. This entire ring, the hallway itself, could be enveloped from one side to the other by just one cast of Growing Mistrust. So, fantastic. I hated these things. Screw these mobs. This is great. Research Scribes Explosive Venom now detonates after 3.5 seconds was 3 seconds. So the Scribes would also put AoE fire books on the ground that would explode. You have a little bit more time now to get out of them. That's great. You could finish your cast probably. Spires of Ascension. Ventanax, the second boss. This guy, he was a race against time. You had to have Bloodlust for him, hopefully Prideful. You had to have a lot of damage. While the channel of recharge completes, any active shadow whirls will now dissipate. Despawn. Hello? It's such a good change! Blizzard! That's such a good freaking change. That significantly changes the difficulty of the boss. That is so freaking good. I cannot stress how good this is. Again, this boss was less of a problem on Fortified because you just killed it faster and there was less shadow whirls out on the boss encounter. But changing this so that when he recharges, and he recharges twice on Fortified, 4 or 5 times on Tyrannical, this was so hectic on Tyrannical weeks. But now it's completely despawning shadow whirls. Insane. This is significantly reducing the complexity, the difficulty of this boss, especially on Tyrannical weeks. This is such a good change. I am so happy about this change myself. All these changes are so good for Tyrannical weeks that it's just going to be not as bad to push on Tyrannical weeks. I'm happy about it. All right. Theater of Pain. Affront of Challengers. Zyra the Underhanded has returned on Mythic difficulties only. This is annoying. This is an annoying change. I say that because she's not even showing up in the dungeon journal, which is a pain in the ass because I'm going to try and describe what she did. So if you guys played, this girl right here, Zyra the Underhanded, was a rogue type NPC that you could not kill. She was just part of the fight, okay? She was invisible for most of the fight, and she would periodically come out of invisibility to stun a player. Now, the only way that you could get the player out of the stun or the incapacitate was you had to CC her yourself. It could happen with a polymorph, a trap, a stun, anything. Any type of CC you could do to get this I want to say really mean things to this. I hated her. To get her off of your player. This was especially difficult when things like Raging Bloodhorn usually pull into the boss, and if Zyra immediately stuns a player while the Sathith of the Accursed was putting out what's the ability that needs to be interrupted? Searing Death, right? This can be interrupted on Mythic difficulty. You have to assign kicks to Searing Death, right? Like, it made the boss a lot more hectic. There was a reason that Zyra the Underhanded was taken out of the boss encounter. I don't know why, they're putting her back in, especially because the main theme of these changes are to directly address the difficulty of the bosses on tyrannical weeks. This change, I mean, it's not unplayable, but it's just making things difficult. And perhaps it's to stop groups from pulling Raging Bloodhorn into the first boss. I doubt that it's going to stop groups from doing that. They're still going to do it, but this is just going to become that much more of a hectic boss fight, is all I'm saying. And I don't agree with the change. I think removing Zyra, just getting her out of there, was a good change. You had 3 bosses that did different abilities all the time. And on top of that, you had to kill a Raging Bloodhorn if you brought it into the boss. You had to dedicate Lust. Obviously, you didn't have the Prideful buff going into here. It was really hectic to start out, especially when it came to tank threat, because your DPS were just blowing their loads right at the start. Okay. Bringing Zyra back, I don't like it. That's my opinion. On another note, this is a good one. Zav the Unfallen. Oppressive banner, health reduced by 20%. This is actually a really good change. Zav the Unfallen was the, what are they called? Their house. I forget. House of the Chosen. There we go. The House of the Chosen wing, where the oppressive banners went down, reducing the movement speed of all players by 15% every 3 seconds while it persisted. Obviously, if you were a shaman, you just Ghost Wolfed, and it didn't even matter to you, because you can't be slowed past 100% movement speed while you're in Ghost Wolf. Some classes obviously had a lot more difficulty getting out of the brutal combos than others. And in some cases, you just some strategies, you just completely ignored the banners. And if your team had enough movement speed, oppressive, like getting rid of things like freedom, rogues could use sprint, I guess. You could use your Covenant abilities, Night Fae, Soul Shape, Door of Shadows, stuff like that, right? Mobility. If your group did not have enough mobility, the oppressive banner and brutal combo together could be problematic. Reducing the health of oppressive banner obviously makes things a lot easier for pug groups to kill the banner faster. And for tyrannical weeks, when the strategy of not being or just ignoring the banner was a lot harder to do, because obviously the boss had more health. There was a lot more banners that came out during the fight, which means a lot more brutal combos as well. Not as many cooldowns to reduce the impact of movement slowing effects. Unless you're a shaman, you can just completely ignore it. So, reducing the HP of Oppressive Banner is a good choice here. I like it. I do not like bringing Zyra back. I think that's a silly change. Guys, all in all, these are good changes. Some of them I don't like. Some of them are going to be surprising. Like, for instance, the rigged Plague Boars are now wretched Plague Boars. I have no idea what that means. I haven't tried it out on the PTR yet, so I don't have an answer for you. But this alone could significantly change the course of how we approach the Plaguefall dungeon. But there's a lot of really good changes specifically for Tyrannical Weeks, so it'll make Tyrannical Weeks a lot better going forward. I like it. I hope you guys like it too. Leave a comment down below what your thoughts are on the new changes for Mythic Plus. My name's Barokoshama again. Like the channel, or like the video if you like it. Subscribe for more Shaman content and Shadowlands content going in the future. And until next time, keep calm and Maelstrom on. Bye-bye. Hey, Arthas, you want some coffee there, bud?